inviting me to come and share this time with you. Um, I just really believe that there is a paradigm shift that is happening in the world, and I think that it's spurred on by digital technology, social media, and and I really think that what it's pushing our profession and others to do is to really begin to question the basis to what we view and what we understand as being true and worth knowing. And I believe that in the next generation or this next group of occupational therapists to rise up and move forward, that you're bringing a tremendous awareness um, and knowledge to our world. Uh, I'm hesitating to talk because the word that came into my mind is that you're all becoming woke, and I don't know how that word got to be such a pejorative, and political. But what it means to me to be woke is to understand phenomena and objects in the world in context, in the complexity of the context in which it is embedded. And so that's a little bit about what I want to talk with you about tonight. This is not some kind of a lecture on the Kawa model and where I give you a recipe and everybody memorizes the concepts and we all go along our way. But rather, I want to empower you to be able to understand the Kawa model um, to the point where you can control it and you can figure out what you want to take from it, what you want to use, what you want to modify and change, um, and also to make good decisions when it's right to push it aside and to choose some other kind of a framework that is going to be much more safe for your clients. So it's not a lecture about the Kawa model, but rather it's about the underpinnings. What supports this thing that we see on the surface that we call the Kawa model? And so I'm going to take you on hopefully a profound journey, not just into the Kawa model, but rather into yourselves and into you as a human being and as a member of a greater community. And so uh, if it seems a little bit theoretical, it's going to seem that way at times. Let your curiosity go and let it have its way. And as you listen to what I have to share with you tonight, I hope that you'll go away from this and even look at the recording and critically evaluate it. Like look at it again and evaluate it, and to figure out for yourself whether it's true or not, or whether it's worth knowing or not. Um, okay, so I know that we also have some special people joining us this evening. Um, Ever since we put this on Facebook to kind of advertise the fact that we're going to have this event, I think there's been a response from all over the world. And in particular, I want to highlight a very special group of people that I believe have joined us or want to join us from all the way from the Southern Hemisphere, from Australia, and specifically in an area of Australia in the northeastern region, the state of Queensland. But north of Queensland, between Australia and what is politically Australia and New Guinea, is a group of islands called the Torres Strait Islands. And the Torres Strait Islander community, as well as the Aboriginal community in Australia, have discovered the Kawa model. And one thing that really excites me about what they're doing is that, and this is what I want people to do with the Kawa model, is to reflect on their own culture and their own worldviews, and to be able to modify and change the Kawa model in little ways or in profound ways so that it becomes safer and more effective and meaningful for the population with which it's being shared with. So I know that they're doing some very exciting things. These are practitioners um, indigenous people who are boldly stepping forward and reconfiguring, reconceptualizing occupational therapy and other health practices to better meet the needs of their people, and first and foremost, for it to be safe and useful for them. A kind of decolonization of Western health practices. Okay, so I'm going to share some slides with you, and I tend to be kind of long-winded and I kind of go off on tangents and talk. Just trust me that everything does tie together, and we might even go a little bit overtime if you got some time, but let's see how far we get. Okay, so I think along the bottom I press share, and then I take the thing that I want to share, and then I get this. Do you all see this now? My slide?
It's black right now. Oh, there we go. Yep, here we are.
Oh, there's a time delay
Yes,
because the signal's got to go all the way from the eastern part of the United States all the way over to the best coast, right?
West Coast, Best Coast. Thank you.
The west coast is the best coast. My hometown is Vancouver, Canada, just north of Seattle. So I'm a west coaster myself. All right, I hit this button that says it's okay for this to be recorded. Okay, so I put a provisional title here, um, stated as like a river toward Eastern and indigenous ways of knowing. And I alluded to the fact that we're now going through this paradigm shift in our thinking and in our ways of knowing in occupational therapy. And I have a sense that ethnic groups and racial groups within occupational therapy have in some ways been objectified and have been othered, and where there have been pressures placed upon these diverse people to adopt and comply to the kinds of social and cultural norms that lie mainstream within our profession of occupational therapy. And for OT to progress and become better for more people, we can't just change the things that we do on the surface in our practice and change our techniques and so on. We have to go much deeper than that. We have to go right down to the very basis of our knowing. And we have to, this is a thought that I had 25 years ago, we have to develop new frameworks and new models, and lots of them, so that we can configure occupational therapy to truly meet the needs of the people that we're mandated to serve. Okay, so now it's customary for people who are grounded in the critical social sciences to spend a moment in the beginning to tell you where we're from or where we are situated. So I'm going to tell you, whether you like it or not, I'm going to tell you where this old man has been over the course of my 40-year career as an occupational therapist. But the reason why I tell you this is that ideas and theory and models don't descend from heaven. They're constructed and made by ordinary people like you and me. And the things that we make are informed by what we've learned, what we embody, what we share in terms of experiences with others, especially socially. These are the kinds of things that we acquire, everything that we've learned, everything that we've studied in school and kindergarten and preschool, at church, amongst your friends, in your family, watching your parents behave and what they argue about and what they reward you for. And all of these things, they all come together and they kind of form a lens through which you view the world and make sense of it. And so this is why you can get a whole bunch of people from different parts of the world together in one room, and you can go through an art gallery and take a look at a picture, and some of you will say, wow, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And others might say, that what a piece of garbage that is. I can't believe the museum spent millions of dollars to acquire that piece. I don't know what people see in it. Other times, we'll differ in terms of our morals, our moral code. Why is it that in some circles, a controversial matter of abortion, that people are so diametrically in opposition in terms of their attitudes and understandings and comprehension of this particular issue? How does a person from Tokyo, Japan, decide to walk out in downtown Los Angeles in the middle of the night alone? Um, and seem to kind of do that without a care in their minds. It's because they've grown up in a place where it's that normal to them is that nobody's going to approach, nobody's going to threaten, nobody presents any kind of danger. In the same way, somebody from Los Angeles may go over to Tokyo and somebody might say, let's go for a walk. It's 2 a.m. We're jet lagged. Let's go and experience things together. And the person from LA says, well, I don't know if that's a good idea or not. That could be kind of dangerous because, we've heard of these experiences and we see it in the news and so on and so forth. It's not a good idea. We're all experiencing similar things or we're looking at similar things in common, but yet we have such different takes on it and different ways of making sense of it. It's kind of like all of these experiences and everything that we've learned form the kind of lens through which we view the world and make sense of it, right? So, this is why, in order for me to share these ideas with you, I want you to be able to critically take it apart and to view it from your experience through your lenses. And by doing so, you'll also understand, you'll say in your mind, oh, yeah, okay, I realize now why he says this about that. Because, you know, he's had experiences doing this and that, and this happened to him in his life. And, he had this really bad thing that happened during his early life. And whatever the case may be, ideas don't flow from heaven. They're not universal. They're not things, no matter how good they look to us, they don't necessarily apply to others, or others don't particularly see it the same way. It's a really important fundamental point that I'm making here. Okay, so I got to try to advance my slide, and I think I do it like this. Snowstorm from Canada. Okay, so I was born and raised in Japan, and a particular part of Japan, the southernmost prefecture or state in Japan, a small island called Okinawa. And I mentioned this, it's of great significance, but I'll just say that I was there until I was ready to enter high school when my family then moved to Vancouver, Canada. And that's where I went through high school and did most of my tertiary education. I trained to be an OT there. I spent some time in a nearby city called Victoria. I went to the University of Victoria in order to gain my first bachelor's degree, which was in the field of exercise physiology. And from there, I wanted to become a physical therapist because I wanted to do physical therapy. Um, and I went down that path. I got accepted into a PT program, and then eventually I saw the light and quit and became an occupational therapist instead. As an I started practicing as an OT. I graduated from the University of British Columbia, and the person that gave me my first job teaching was none other than this my lifelong mentor, whose name is Charles Christensen. And so he gave me my first job teaching at the university, and while I was doing that and also practicing occupational therapy in the field of return to work OT, I had an opportunity to return to my native Japan um, to teach occupational therapy, to help establish one of the first OT programs of OT there. And back then, OT was kind of like a diploma or certificate program, and they were all transitioning to a bachelor's degree level. So I was there to teach. And um, it was during those experiences of, you know, being born in Japan, acculturating into North American life, and then moving to Japan as an adult, returning to Japan, and reacculturating back into Japanese life, and then coming from Japan back to Canada to have to then adjust and acculturate into Canadian norms of behavior and being. It's in those tensions that I had my aha moments, this epiphany that, oh, maybe occupational therapy as it's constructed in the culture of Western occupational therapy, um, uh, maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's not just a matter of these ideas being universal and everybody just has to try hard to understand OT and its ideas. I was awakened to the fact that there's something much more profound. And there's a red flag of alert that I'll put up right away, and that my work has always been controversial. And the Kawa model has had adversity every step of the way. And I've come to understand culture uh, and discrimination and othering in a very, very a different but profound way. But anyway, I digress. Um, I also then lived in a place in Western Japan. It's up here on the screen, Kurashiki, and that is where the Kawa model actually was made of a group from a group of practitioners, clients, and students of occupational therapy, who I assembled and brought them through a process of qualitative research in order to develop the model. Uh, I was able then to come back to North America. I took a faculty position at a place called Dalhousie University, way over on the east coast of Canada, and like north of Maine, um, north of Boston, north of Maine, that part of the world. And then from there, I then moved over to teach OT at the University of Toronto. And I was there for about 8 years. And during that time, I had a fellowship or a professorial, honorary professorial appointment at a place called the University of Queensland in Australia. And that's situated in a city known as Brisbane. So I was going back and forth there. Um, and then uh, just when I thought that I would be going into the last phase of my career, I turned the big 50, and I thought, gee, I wonder if I should just, you know, retire at Canada's top university as a professor and just walk off into the sunset. But I thought that there was still something left in the tank. And I thought, I've experienced everything in OT, but I've never experienced higher academic leadership. So uh, I ended up down in the United States, and not just in like across the border into New York or into Washington State, not like that, all the way down to the deep South, and ended up at a place called the Medical College of Georgia. And I chaired an occupational therapy program there. I spent a number of years there, and some people thought that I was doing such a good job that I was then invited to come to go to Boston to there's a huge hospital up there known as Massachusetts General Hospital or Mass General, and they have a Graduate Institute of Health Professions, and that is where they appointed me as dean of the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences. And COVID happened. I had some health issues and problems. I had to go through about 3 or 4 major surgeries, and that's when my family convinced me to not go back into a deanship anywhere, but rather to go back to my first love, which is teaching. So that's how I ended up at Duke University. Okay, so I took the time to tell you all of this, but this is what my life has been like. And at every place along the way, I've had spheres of shared experiences with other people who reside in all of these different places. And not just have I lived in these places, but I've also looked at and lived occupational therapy. And it's given me some insights that I believe are worth sharing in order to move our profession forward. And so this is what I'm going to spend, the next 40 minutes or so doing. Okay, so please look at this stuff with an open mind. Okay, and then you can go back and reevaluate whether you want to believe it or not, or whether you want to, reconfigure it. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I was born on the island of Okinawa, and Okinawa is a very special place in Japan because it's not only close to the Japanese archipelago, the main islands of Japan, but it's in proximity to Korea, the Korean peninsula, to Taiwan and the coast of China, as well as to the Philippines. Um, this is the reason why the United States of America decided to establish a large military base there. And because of that, they also established a number of schools for military personnel and their families. And I had the privilege of being able to go to get an American education. So my family life was very much Japanese, but my life during the daytime was really all about America or aspects of America. And, about mom and dad and apple pie and all of these things that people kind of, talk dreamily about when people think about the United States. But this is where I learned really the first sensations of what it's like to be from a worldview in which all things are connected together. Like that way of knowing and viewing the world is familiar to people who study Buddhism, for example, who practice Buddhism, where all elements of nature, you and me and everybody within it, are inseparably connected together, always in flux, always changing, um, changing from moment to moment to moment. That whole idea of impermanence. Juxtapose that against what I was learning in school, all the way from kindergarten up, right? All about the aggrandizement of the individual, of being independent and separate from the environment to the point where we can control our circumstances and control the environment. And, we take all of this stuff for granted because it's just a part of our normal. It's a part of the lenses that we've acquired that, of course, doing, being, becoming, yeah, that's correct. When the individual is in the center of the universe, when we learn that, it changes our whole attitude toward everything. And we place quite a bit of primacy on what I want to do, what is meaningful to do to me. And if I lose that ability, then that's kind of the end of life for me. There's nothing worth living for. If I can't do the things that I want to do in life, then what's the sense of living? Years ago, when I worked in a spinal cord injury unit, I recall so vividly that the first while that when patients are admitted, usually young people, whether the accident was, motorcycle or diving into a shallow pool or whatever it was, there was a suicide watch where 24/7 you had to vigilantly watch each of the patients because they would go through the process of evaluating their lives, and some were in such deep despair and depression about their predicament that that was often a drive that they had. Whereas in Japan, um, it's really quite different, and I'm going to get into that in a few moments. But what I'm saying is that this is where my first ideas and sensations and understandings of the world, that's where it all came from. And this is what has gone through challenges and rethinking as I've then moved to other places and have experienced life and new things, new objects in a whole bunch of different contexts. Now, some of you have got experience of this, of either living in another country or even within your own homes, in which your parents, for example, are from a particular ethnicity or cultural group. And while they're very much American in their practices, there are some aspects of their thinking and their value systems and the way that they do things and the kind of cooking that's done in the home that is anchored to another sphere of shared experiences. So you're all very much coming into and diving into this phenomena of culture. So I've just tried to illustrate in this one slide the kind of cultural tensions that go back and forth. And if you ever have watched, Netflix or whatever network shows Shogun, right? Uh, Watch it because it's all about the tensions between East and West. Somebody from this part of the world gets displaced and is now in a very different place, and the context changes altogether. And then there are all of these dynamics that occur, things that work and things that don't work, and so on and so forth. Well, that's the tension out of which the Kawa model was born. Even the need for a model like the Kawa model, that's where it came from. So all of you, if you study theory, in your first year of classes in occupational therapy, you'll usually come across a whole bunch of well-established occupational therapy frameworks and models. And they're all very well established. The evidence base behind them is all there. Um, so why would somebody ever want to build a model, especially like in a different language, in a different part of the world? Like we've got these well-established models. This is what we learn. All OTs know this stuff. Why do we need something different? Why do we need something so bizarrely different that it just doesn't even jive with our own worldviews? Well, we're going to find out. So, if you were to go to Asia, um, or you were to go to various different islands in the Pacific, um, wherever it is that you go, and if there's an association of occupational therapy, I pretty much guarantee that each one of those countries, each one of those places that has an association of OT will have derived or have developed a different concept and definition of occupation. So this is something that we don't question. It's one of our sacred texts within the culture of Western occupational therapy. Occupation, it's like a mantra. And uh, if you're not doing occupation-based practice, then you're not doing authentic occupational therapy. Well, you go to a place like Japan, and uh, they can't find a word in their own language or lexicon that captures all of these wonderful things that occupation seems to be in the culture of Western occupational therapy. So whether you go to Taiwan, whether you go to Korea, whether you go to Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, all of these different places have derived a different definition for occupation, the occupation that's part of occupational therapy. So, um, uh, and a hint into why it is that if you take Japan, where the glasses or lenses that all of the kids and everybody acquires in life isn't so celebratory of the individual centric experience. People have described the Japanese as being group-oriented, collectivist. And if we take that idea a little bit further, Japanese people learn how to go deeper into this inseparable condition with not just each other, but the world. And uh, from that experience, it's really hard to get your head around occupation, doing, being, becoming, belonging. Occupation is the basis to health and well-being. Through occupation, you can affect the state of your own health. Some of these things are true because in your experience, in your part of the world, you can reconcile that idea against your real experiences. But there are people in other parts of the world that have learned the world and the meaning of life in a very different way. And they can't just take those sensations and ideas that you have around occupation in the Western world and just adopt them. So what they do is they memorize the translations from Willard and Spackman. You know, occupation is, all of this stuff, right? From their collectivist existence, where individual agency is not necessarily such a good thing, they have to choose some word that will kind of make sense to the Japanese. The Japanese chose 50 years ago to translate occupation of occupational therapy to be this word, sagyo. Sagyo literally means tedious, laborious, mundane, unpleasant, hard work. So can you imagine if that's what kind of a therapist you are? That's inherent in your title. Sagyo Ryohoshi, occupational therapist. Oh, this is a therapist that has something to do with tedious, laborious, mundane, boring, unpleasant, hard work, right? That is why whenever I go to speak internationally about occupational therapy and about the Kawa model and about matters of culture, I say that more than the definition of occupation or the word occupation, I would rather think that what binds us together in this great profession is actually not a definition, but a promise that we make to society. And that is to enable people from all walks of life, all streams of life, ordinary people, to engage and participate in activities and processes of everyday life that matter. In other words, we're all about enabling people to move toward their potential. Something along those lines. And when we frame it in this way, people in different cultural spaces can find that they can relate to this a little bit more easily and that it can kind of make sense to them. Okay, this is OT's Magnificent Promise. Um, Now, I've been talking about culture in a very interesting way. I've been talking about culture in a collectivist way. And so instead of reducing culture to physical features and embodiment and observable patterns, such as cooking, language, fashion, dances, instead of that, I would rather think about culture. What would be much more helpful is we were to refer to culture as shared spheres of experience. And not only is it about spending time together with a group of people and experiencing things together so that we are deriving similar understandings of the phenomena and the objects that we encounter as a group. We don't just share those ideas, but if we spend enough time together, we'll actually begin to give meaning to the objects and the phenomena that we are experiencing together. So if I tell a joke or a bunch of jokes and everybody here starts laughing, and then sometime in the future, after you graduate, you've been practicing OT for 20 years and you bump into each other at LAX airport. And you have this wonderful reunion and you're reminiscing. You're remembering all of the things about your culture that anybody else around you can't understand. And then in one moment you say, "Oh, remember that Dr. Iwama guy that came and he told a whole bunch of jokes and that was so funny." And and you start laughing. And the people around you that are waiting at the gate to board the plane, they see you laughing and getting all excited, and they've heard your conversation. They have absolutely no clue. They don't share in the same emotions. And why? It's because they haven't been a part of your spheres of shared experience. They haven't been a part of your culture. Okay, so um, culture has a way of being able to experience things together and then deciding and giving meaning and even names to the type of things that we encounter together. So in this particular example, oh, Dr. Iwama, he's a funny guy. That may be one set of meanings that come out of that experience. Okay, so the implications of this. If we look at culture in this way, then we'll say that occupational therapy, as we learn it and practice it in the Western part of the world, we can be seen as a cultural entity. We've got this shared system of language, words like occupation, personal causation, self-efficacy, um, occupational justice, occupational balance. We know what that means because it's been a part of our shared sphere of experiences. But you go out onto the streets of any city in California or Australia, and you ask somebody there, when you hear the word occupation, what does it mean to you? They're not saying doing, being, becoming, and it's the basis to our health and well-being. No, what they're saying is, are you talking about my job? Are you talking about my occupation? Or are you talking about like when countries in the north go into the south and start settling into their lands and then taking their resources, forcing them to speak our language, educating them to our norms, and what people call colonization? Is that what you mean by occupation? Well, from their sphere of shared experiences and what they've learned, that's what occupation is to them. Okay. There's common learned values. We've got these, unspoken tacit rules of conduct. We've got established social practices. You go out on your level one or level two field work placements, and, this is kind of what you become acculturated into. You know, this is the way that you talk to your clients. This is the way you approach them. This is how you conduct an initial interview, intake interview. This is how you guide them through graded mastery or whatever it is that you're doing the Kawa model, for example. Okay. And we also have these institutional conditions of knowledge production. Oh, yeah, that's believable. Why? Because it's been published in a peer-reviewed journal that has an impact factor of 10. And that somehow is much more credible and more believable than this other thing that has been, published over here. The faith that we put into the things that we create with our own hands or that we develop as human beings is really quite remarkable. Because when you think about the wisdom, the deep wisdom of the elders and of the indigenous peoples of the world, they don't pass knowledge to one another from generation to generation through literature. It's through storytelling. It's through spoken word. It's through that kind of direct contact. And somehow we'll take that kind of evidence and say that's not good evidence. That stuff is subjective. That stuff is like from Never Never Land. We can't really believe that. We can't rely on it. We have to objectively measure it. It has to be physically, observable, felt, smelled, heard. Okay, so I want you to just understand that we are part also of a cultural entity. And so OTs, we operate within the prevailing rules of conduct in which we live and practice. And so another way of saying this is that occupation as we know it in the culture of occupational therapy is culturally bound. All right. So this is a very controversial thing. Um, but I don't want you all to keep drinking the Kool-Aid. I want you to know what you're drinking. And I want you to make good decisions about whether you want to drink it or not, or whether you want to drink something else, or not drink at all. Okay? I'm trying to empower you to think critically, to think independently, and to just not take the way that you've been categorized and described and objectified as Pacific Islander OTs or as East Asian OTs or Torres Strait Islander OTs or Aboriginal OTs. Understand the greater context, or in other words, get woke. Okay? All right. All right. So this just bears mentioning just to let you know that I'm not just talking about OT and Never Never Land in some kind of a theoretical way. What I'm saying is that if you were to come from outside of OT and you were to examine what occupational therapy was about, you'd come away thinking, oh, OTs are people who work in the Western healthcare or industrialized world, how they do healthcare. They're usually found in institutions that are tied in some way to medicine. And everybody in that place is concerned about something, a problem that is assumed to be located in the body. Embodied pathology, that includes the head. When you go to the hospital with a problem, they'll take you through a process where they want to know exactly where in your body the problem is occurring. And they want to also know the quality of the experience, your subjective report. And then they can send you for more objective testing, figure out where the problem is, what the nature of the problem is, and then the diagnosis, the title is slapped onto it, ascribed, right? It's given meaning. And then from there, occupational therapy and other kinds of services can be prescribed and and asked for, ordered. Okay. And then you come in, but the benchmark of measurement here is the embodied pathology. And, you know, uh, usually it's treated, right, with medications or surgery or some kind of intervention. But what I'm here to tell you is that the great promise of occupational therapy, our potential to have the greatest impact on the world today, is not just to be good at helping people deal with embodied pathology, but to actually help them deal with the consequences of those embodied pathologies on everyday life. Okay, you have a back injury. Everybody in the hospital is focused in on the soft tissue injury at the L4, L5 level of your lumbar spine. They'll prescribe medications to relax the muscles in the area. They'll relax an analgesic to take pain away, lower the inflammation. And or if they find a bigger problem, they may actually take you into surgery and actually deal with it directly. Whatever the case, you have all of these professionals that are focused in on the embodied pathology. We go through life acquiring competency in how we live everyday life, and to the point where we kind of take it for granted. We can dress ourselves, wash our faces, take a shower, do this and do that. We don't even think about it. But when there's disruption that happens, whether it's an embodied pathology or whether it's something external like an earthquake or a crash of the economy or COVID, when those kinds of disruptions happen and your daily life patterns are thrown into great disarray, we find out that we're not so good at putting all the pieces back together again. We need somebody. We need somebody to guide us. And not just somebody that understands the person and embodied pathology, but also is an expert on the environment and the relationship between the self and the environment. This is where occupational therapy's greatest value is. And um, It's yet to be realized. It's our great potential. Because think about it, you have this back injury, right? You go off into your into life with this, and you find out that you know you're sitting on the couch and you can't get up in the morning at the regular time because your back is in too much pain and you're all drugged up with all kinds of medications, and so you can't go to work, you can't go to school, and then your kids can't play with you anymore, or you can't help them with their homework when they come home in the afternoon. You can't even embrace your partner, give them a hug. You can't do that. You can't help with the cooking or with the chores in the home. Your friends that you go out with on game night or whatever it is that you do with your friends once a week, well, they all of a sudden just don't call you anymore because they're going to hear the same thing. I'm in too much pain. I can't come tonight. So this thing persists, right? What you're looking at the social roles that are now going into disarray, complete disarray. The role of worker, employee, student, the role of sibling maybe or family member, the role of parent, the role of volunteer, at church or wherever it is that you spend some of your time, the role of friend. All of these roles that we just kind of acquire from living daily life, when that stuff gets all disrupted, we don't understand what's happening. Now, you get that problem and everything's thrown into disarray, you go further with that and see what happens. Your family, you start quarreling with your partner because you're not working, you've lost your job, you can't make ends meet, you can't buy groceries, they're going to shut off your water and your electricity. There's nothing but tension and conflict, and you know the problem continues to become more complex. Now it's now to the point where now you're thinking about maybe dissolving your marriage. You're going to go your separate ways because you can't live under the same roof. You're going to, hurt each other. Okay, so it devolves into that. If that, and meanwhile, every 2 weeks he's going back to the hospital, and what are they interested in? They're interested in the pathology that's embodied. They'll rescan your back and they'll ask you how you're feeling, and they may even, prescribe massage this time or that this time. Meanwhile, this person's whole life, their sense of well-being, it's all completely fallen apart in disarray. They can't put the pieces back together again. But you know who can help? Who is an expert at all of this? Who understands the environment? Who understands the human body? Who understands this relationship between the two? That's you, the OT. So we have yet to really exert our place and our role, our helpful role to society. And I want to believe and hope that we're moving that way. But in order for us to move that way, we need to have more frameworks, more tools, more methods, more approaches. We have to innovate these things. And the Kawa model is one of those innovations. Because what I wanted to do with the Kawa model was to have the person be able to tell a story about what their day-to-day life experience is like, what their rocks are, where their water is flowing, what their driftwood are, what the river walls and sides look like. We want to get an understanding of what that person's experience is. And instead of going in there and saying, I'm an OT, we're going to do like ADL training, we're going to do this and that. No, take the time to understand as much as you can. You've never walked a mile in their shoes, so you don't really know, right? So you want to understand, you want to exercise empathy, you want to try, you want to exercise love, the love that seeks to give, asking nothing in return. You decide that you're going to listen and you're going to probe it. You're going to say, why is this rock so big? Why are the river walls so wide in this particular area? What is this driftwood? And what are the flowers and the fish doing in your river? Okay? You're trying to get closer and closer to understanding what that person's life flow is like and where the problems are, where the opportunities are, where the good points are. The Kawa model is merely a tool that we can communicate, that it's a metaphor that the client and the therapist both can understand in common. Life is like a river. The therapist thinks, yeah, I can relate to that. The client hears the same thing. Life is like a river. Yeah, yeah, it is. So now you've got this common language where you can now begin to talk and learn about each other's experiences, as well as for the client to really understand what occupational therapy is and what kind of what occupational therapy is going to look like going forward. So the Kawa model is merely a tool, a method to get as close as you can to the client's experience of everyday life. Now, contrast this with taking a framework that's based on a different cultural reality and then using that framework and just without even asking the client, just force it onto them. And that becomes your lens and your template. And now all of a sudden, your whole view of the person has become narrow. Okay, so that's what we used to do in the modern era, in the modern age, ever since the Great Enlightenment, the rise of science, reductionism, all of that. We've gone forward now, and we have created these frameworks that we think are universally applicable. There's a problem when you take ideas and methods from one cultural setting across cultural boundaries of meaning, and then you apply them to people who abide in a whole different cultural reality. Some people would call that kind of colonialist. Some people would say this is bordering on oppression. Well, there are times when it does work out kind of nicely, but there is this tension. This fundamental problem that has plagued occupational therapy theory and models since the time that they were created in the 1980s and on. Um, how do we solve this? Well, if you take a look at the power dynamic, the Western professional know-it-all is now, the power is moving downwards to the client. You're telling the client what to do. You're going to explain their reality to them, what their needs are, and so on and so forth. That's the way the dynamic is. If you look at it from a power analysis perspective. Okay, so how do you solve this? How do you solve colonialism? You turn that power dynamic on its head. You turn it upside down. So now the client becomes the theorist who builds a model or story that explains their day-to-day realities. And you, as the OT, initially becomes a student of that theorist and their model. Okay? And so you ask questions back and forth. Oh gosh, what is this rock over here? The person tells you. Why do you have fish in your river? The person tells you. Through this dialogue, through this discussion, you're getting closer and closer to what is really, really happening in this person's life and how they're really doing. And then together, you can look at these issues together, think about how occupational therapy can make a difference. Maybe it will require you to send a consult for another professional to be able to work on some other aspect of the person's life or river, right? But the thing is that you're now like a coach. You're now like a partner in this person's progression instead of the professional that is doing something to the patient. And that is how you move the river forward. There are things that happen upriver that affect the way the river flows in the present. There are things in the future that are tied to the things that are happening in the here and now. So, what makes the Kawa model unique and particularly Eastern, Asian, and indigenous in nature is that all things in nature are inseparably connected together, always in flux, always changing from moment to moment. But you change one part of the river, it changes the whole river. You put a rock into that river, it's not the same river. It's changed. The water flow dynamic has changed. You see what I'm getting at? Okay, so the river is not just connected in a cross section, but also longitudinally. So there's a new concept that I've added to the Kawa model in the last couple of months. And I'll write about it and it'll come out in the next edition of Willard and Spackman's Occupational Therapy. It's a concept of sand. And this came about because we were, in my class that I teach, we were looking at trauma-informed care through the lens of the Kawa model. And, the narrative might go like this. Earlier on, when this river was just in its beginning, very early on, when it was just a small river, a creek, a big rock all of a sudden appeared. It fell into the river. And um, uh, what happens is that as water flows past that rock over time, it begins to break that rock down little by little into sediment that's carried downriver in the form of sand. And it deposits itself around the base of the rocks and around the river walls and other structures that are in the river. The sand itself isn't big enough or formidable enough to block the flow of water. It can add to the impediment to the flow, definitely. And the great hope around all of this is that the further you go downriver, the less and less sand you see. I wanted there to be some kind of marker of distinction that would honor the survivorship, that would acknowledge um, the injury, the difficulty. I wanted a marker of courage, of something that basically says my rivers flows despite these things that have found their way in it. And but however, this doesn't define me. My river continues to flow. It will flow. It's going to go to where it needs to go. And um, so the concept of sand is not for the client per se, because the client is going to decide what appears in their river. It's more from the therapist's point of view to be aware and cognizant of these significant injuries that happen upriver that that get pushed under the carpet. The person, an incredible betrayal has occurred too early in life. And if they are lacking confidence in the present, if they're finding that they're not so good at doing certain things, if they can't concentrate, if they can't, you know, um, I once had a professor whose name was Gabor Mate, and he's got his videos on the internet. He was not my professor. He was a guest lecturer that used to come into our OT class, and he works with intravenous substance users in the downtown part of Vancouver, Canada. And for from decades of being there helping people, he said one thing that was really profound that stuck with me. He says, you know what, like we vilify the actual like drugs and the taking of drugs. We've made that the enemy. When really, he says 99% of the people that he helps on the streets of downtown Vancouver um, is one thing: childhood trauma. And uh, that emotional pain, there's no difference between physical and emotional pain in terms of how it changes your neurological system and the brain. And uh, that we should have compassion, an extra measure of empathy for people that are in this predicament. I'm not saying that all people that experience trauma go on to use intravenous drugs or something like fentanyl. No, there are a lot of people who cope in other ways. But for some people, the pain is so great that they just yearn for a moment of relief from the devil that's on their back 24/7. And, when I see it in that way, I'm filled with compassion in just a whole different way. I guess you can call that being woke, but that's the concept of sand. So one thing that I didn't get to, and we're not going to get through any of all of these slides. You're going to have me come back. Um, Let me just blow through some of these, and then we'll get to. Uh, yeah, okay. I just want to touch on this because I think it's important. Karen, how many minutes do I have left? Did I go over time already?
That's okay. Yes. You are
Okay,
a little over time, but that's okay.
okay,
If anyone does need to leave, it will be recorded if you'd like to view it. But yeah, no, we can hang. We're good.
okay. So this is the Asian American and Pacific Islander. Oh no, the Association of you guys, of us, of me, and and so what I want to do is this: is that I want you to become more aware of a different cosmological myth. Okay, so what does Dr. Iwama mean by that? These people who wrap themselves around theory are just like from Never Never Land. But cosmological myths are those schema that you have in each one of us. We have one of these. The explanation of it all. Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Where do we go after we die? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Why am I so handsome? How did I get to be this way? Why me? All of these questions, right? The deep questions that we have in life, we've developed some kind of a schema that kind of explains it all. And that's what a cosmological myth is. So, in the social scientific literature, one of the most common cosmological myths is what uh, I explained earlier, where all things in nature, and if you're uh, 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 from Christian religion, then uh, uh, all of creation is all inseparably connected together, always moving, always in flux. And I went looking in the literature for the earliest evidence that I could find of this particular cosmological myth. And I found it in the books of the law, according to Judaism, in the Quran of Islam, as well as in the Christian Old Testament, the Garden of Eden. And this is where all of God's creation is cohabitating. Everything's in balance, everything's in harmony, and everything will remain that way as long as these guys don't go and eat fruit from the tree that's in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so in this particular worldview, everything is together and meant to be balanced and in harmony. And one thing about being lost in this is that you are not in the center of the universe. You're just part of that harmony. And so, you know, we haven't gotten to the part yet where it's like, well, I get to do what I want to do. No, everybody is okay. Everybody is happy. Everybody's content. And so, but what happens is that this fellow goes and eats the fruit, right? Adam and Eve eat this fruit. And what happens is that all hell breaks loose. Because all of a sudden, what do? They notice their own nakedness and they're ashamed, right? That's how the story goes. Before, they didn't even notice that they were even a self. They weren't looking at their nakedness and thinking that it was anything to be ashamed of or different. They didn't have that consciousness. But when they ate that fruit, they became separate entities. And what this means to me, that's when the cosmological myth got exploded into the contemporary cosmological myth in which all things are uh, you can see this diagram on the right-hand side here where there's the original sphere of the old primitive cosmological myth, and now it's been rationally separated apart into parts. And when we think about our own existence, we have this great tendency to take the complexity of the world around us, and we like to then separate things, look at the differences, look at the commonalities, and then we like to then categorize these things that we see. We put them into groups. We don't just put them into groups, we put them into groups and then we label them. We ascribe meaning and titles to these things. And what we're actually doing is that we are exercising power and dominion over all of these elements of nature. So if you want to exert your authority over things, well, then you go and you become the person who names all of the animals. You name this, oh, this is a pineapple. Oh, this is an orange. Okay. Now it's like you've now given it, you have exercised incredible power. You've now just dictated what they're going to be called. So this radical separation of the primitive cosmological myth into all of these different parts, this is what the scientific method is based on. This is what underpins biomedical ways of knowing. This is also what underpins contemporary occupational therapy theory. And so before I show you that slide, I'm going to just say one thing. The so-called primitive cosmological myth, the First Nations people of the world understand this. This is how they view the world. And uh, uh, and it's been this, they've understood this for eons. And we've come about in the last several hundred years and think that, they're primitive, they're simple, they don't publish their work in peer-reviewed journals with impact factors of 10. No, they've tapped into a knowledge set that is eternal. And 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 I think that that it's worth understanding. Okay? So here's my illustration showing, you know, the primitive cosmological myth, and then you eat the fruit, and then you become like God, you get full of pride, and then there you go into the world, and this is the way the world is. So this is the depiction of the cosmological myth and how it's been broken apart into parts. And I'll just say that we can trace this way of thinking all the way back to the Great Enlightenment, because before the Enlightenment of the 1700s, the greatest arbiter of truth, at least in the northern part of the world, was the church. They explained reality. Their cosmological myth was it. Okay, so I mentioned that this is the way of thinking and knowing that underpins science and biomedicine, rehabilitation, as well as occupational therapy. So think about occupational therapy theory as you've learned it in your first year classes, right? You look at any of not the Kawa model, everything except for the Kawa model. If you look at any model of practice in occupational therapy, this is what you will always see. There will always be a concept for the self, and there will also then, like as a distinct and separate entity, the self is the self. This is the individual. Okay? And you have then another concept for the environment, a separate entity from the self. Yes, they're together, practically on top of each other and interacting with each other, but the self is the self and the environment is the environment. They're not the same thing. And there's this gap that exists between the self and the environment. And we have in our culture created this yellow arrow that you see in the middle of your screen called occupation. So my Japanese students the great aha moment that I had was when I was trying to teach the model of human occupation to my students in Japan, and they weren't getting it. I showed this exact same slide to them. That's how old this is. And the question came, Sensei, if the self is in the environment as the environment is in the self, why do I need this yellow arrow that you call occupation? It was like, oh my goodness, what an epiphany. So that's when I started to say to them, look, it's not any lack of intelligence or diligence in studying on your part that you can't get occupational therapy theory. Maybe the theory is wrong. So um, this is what you're looking at is the birth of the Kawa model. This is the moment in which we said, oh, we need other alternative frameworks that can explain or talk about occupational therapy in a way that they can understand. So when we went about making the Kawa model, we wanted it to be a model first and foremost that clients could understand, then students, then practitioners. And the academics can go off and just do whatever they want to do, but this was their mission. And the initial group of Japanese OTs that were disgruntled and disillusioned by how occupational therapy was going, they were practitioners, pediatrics, mental health, uh, gerontology, working with elderly people. Um, yeah, just OTs from all different rehabilitation. Okay, so this is the group that came together, and then we systematically met on a bi-weekly basis, and that's how the Kawa model was born. But you'll notice that in a river, all things are interrelated and connected together. In fact, I think I've got a diagram of the first Kawa model. It looks like oh, it's way down. Okay. I was going to tell you, I was going to I'm sorry, I've gone way over time, I think. I don't even know what time it is, but what I meant to show you, wait, what I meant to show you was the world behind what you see in anime, you know. Um, I wanted to give you a description of Japanese social structure and what drives certain behaviors that we see on the surface. Okay, um, so what I want to say is this, is that we often come into professions like occupational therapy thinking that we have to learn it, that the stuff that's there, tried and true, it's the truth, it's the correct way to do things. And I think it's important to learn all of that. Write your MBCOT certification exam and then go off and start practicing and paying off your student loans. Um, but what I want to challenge you to do is that you have an incredible, important perspective that you bring into our profession. And what is that? It's the variety of experiences that you have in life. And folks, you don't have to be Asian American or Pacific Islander to be bringing something novel into the field of OT. It's the awareness of all of this, of understanding that your clients are diverse. Each of their rivers is beautiful and unique. And you want to now move toward an occupational therapy that addresses the real world problems that our clients face, the kinds of things that they desperately want to figure out but can't on their own. And so the last part of this that I want to leave with you is that some of you will go on to develop theory and frameworks and approaches and models. But what I hope that you will also bring is a critical lens that is courageous enough to just question the veracity and the correctness of the things, the frameworks and the concepts and everything that we learn in occupational therapy and just kind of take for granted that they're true. Because when you do this, you will develop an occupational therapy that's much more safe and responsive to the needs of the population and the people that you serve, people in their communities. Okay, so an extension of this wonderful cosmological myth is this. How many of you like watched Dora the Explorer when you were growing up? Or what about the pink dinosaur guy, the purple dinosaur guy that doesn't have a knee and a hip joint?
Barney.
Barney,
Barney.
yeah. I love
My
you, you love
my kids
me.
are into Dora. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, all right. And the real dangerous one called the Teletubbies. That's my daughter grew up, and I was wondering why her vocabulary was kind of interesting. And I guess she was learning it from the Teletubbies. Anyhow, this is what I want to tell you is that you go through life and everything that you've learned, I said this at the very beginning of this talk, everything that you've learned from your parents, from observing, from your friends, from church, from school, from Barney, from Teletubbies, from what you learned in primary school, middle school, high school, undergraduate, university, college, trips that you've taken to here and there, things that you've survived, all of those things come together to form these lenses through which you view the world and make sense of things. This is how you know when something is good or something is bad, whether it's beautiful or ugly or somewhere between, whether it's morally right or morally wrong, whether it's worth doing or not worth doing, and so on and so forth. Okay? So once you know that, now I'm going to ask you a question. When you encounter a client sitting in front of you and they're affecting you in some kind of a profound way, something kind of makes you feel uneasy, a little bit, I don't know, maybe scared. Maybe it's the way that they look, what they're wearing. Maybe it's the way that they smell. Maybe it's the manner in which they talk. Maybe it's their body language and the way that they use their hand. Whatever it is, it's it is evoking a response in you. And maybe you go away thinking, well, gosh, that's not normal. I don't know what to do here. All right. So I will then ask you, are those markers of distinction that you detect in the other, do they reside in your client, in that person? Is that where they're located, those differences? Or are they actually located in you, in these lenses that you've acquired through your experiences in life? Where you situate and locate these differences and these markers of distinction goes a long ways toward how you're going to treat it, approach it, intervene. If you locate it in the other person, you may want to become colonialist by changing them to meet your standards or to meet an external standard of some sort. They're the ones that are being weird. They're the ones that are different, and they need to now become more acceptable according to my norms and the norms that I've come to understand to be comfortable and correct and right. If you locate them within you, and that's where my bias is, if they're located in yourself, then you'll want to then experience more, educate yourself more, have a hunger for knowledge and take an interest in context. Cultivate the self, cultivate the lenses. And you may find that the very things that you're afraid of are just things that have an explanation. And, um, I think that when we think about matters like racism in our world, we've acquired the modern cosmological myth in that we like to take these wholes and break them into these different parts as if the parts are much more manageable. We objectify those parts and then we carry on these beliefs. Some of it is just ignorance. And when you don't know anything, when you're ignorant about something that's happening, there's often a response of fear. And then the fear then motivates you to act and think in a certain way. But if we develop a hunger for knowledge and experience, then we fortify these lenses and our view of the world becomes wider and greater. And I'll say this is that it won't just cultivate your critical thinking, it will cultivate your occupational therapy. And most importantly, it will cultivate your life. You'll find that when you start to take an interest in populating your lenses and learning as much as you can, you're going to have a better life. You're going to have more of the world that you understand and enjoy. Um, People will seek you for your wise counsel. Um, you'll be able to pass on that knowledge to your kids and to your friends and to the people that are around you. Um, and so, yeah, we didn't get into so deeply into the ethnicity and cultural aspect of things, but I hope that through talking about, the origins of the Kawa model and the underpinning ontology and epistemology of it, that it's given you a greater look into these matters of culture because the Association of Asian American and Pacific Islander Occupational Therapy, yeah, um, in many ways has a profound tie to matters of culture. And I think that there is a tremendous contribution that we as a group can make in evolving and developing our ideas so that they'll not only be more effective, but they'll be more inclusive, that they will be meaningful and culturally safe.
Thank you so
How
much.
about if we stop at that point?
Yes. Thank you so much. I can listen to you talk for on and forever and ever. I just thank you so much for your insights. I think especially as students, where there's a curriculum, you reference NBCOT, there's a curriculum that needs to be taught according to our AOTA or ACOT standards. But beyond that, there's so much that we can challenge about our profession. There's
Yeah,
so much
yeah,
that we can be critical of our profession that sometimes in our academic programs we don't have time for. So I just appreciate this so much, how you are always really inspiring us to think about things differently from a different lens, a different cultural lens. I like the concept of epistemological humility, like whose knowledge matters, whose
yeah,
knowledge is most important to know. So I appreciate you really kind of centering the client's experience and the lived experience of our clients that we work with. So, and I
yeah.
can't wait to see what you write about with the sand. I can't wait to see what you, how you incorporate that to the Kawa
Yeah,
model.
yeah. I think that there are a lot of things, daily life, right? Activities of daily living is just so broad and encompassing. But there are certain things that we don't talk about in OT that we're not so good at addressing that somehow they're just kind of like dangerous topics or something that we don't know how to address or how to interface with it all, right? And
Even ADLs, like from in different cultures, look very, very different than when the Western world too.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but to be able to look beyond and I think that at the end of the day, what I want to say is that what truly heals is not the Kawa model or this approach or that approach or this instrument or this technique. What heals is love. Love is what heals. And I'm not talking about romantic love. I'm talking about like what Christians call agape love, which is, love that seeks to give, asking nothing in return. And when our clients are in a situation of great despair, confusion, loneliness, I want OTs to be that beacon of light and hope, and to be able to say, I want to listen to you. I want to understand. I want to understand your pain. I want to understand what it's really like walking in your shoes. And I'm going to be there with you, and I'm going to partner with you as we work toward making your river flow beautifully. And so, yeah, you know, your OT is going to get better if you go deeper than the surface and look for the humanity that is embedded within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your generous time. I know we're over time. Thank you everyone for being here. We need another time. We need another part two to continue the conversation. All those slides I saw you skipping through. I'm like, oh no, we need more
Yeah.
time.
No, yeah, I'm sorry yeah, usually I bring too many, but I think that, I got to talk about those matters of, ontology, epistemology, culture in just a different and more profound way. And yeah, I hope that our friends from Australia and down under uh, had a chance to also participate this evening. But if not, perhaps we can also extend the viewing of the recording to them if possible.
Yeah, I'm just going to put our website in the chat up. I'm putting the link to the student research study in the chat, but also our website too. So we will post the recording to our website for anyone to access that, and we can share that with any community that might be interested.
So is like did I like go for an hour and